My name is Amy Rose. I'm 34 years old, and until recently, I believed my life was defined by two things: reliability and restraint. I work in digital risk assessment for a mid-sized cybersecurity firm. On paper, that sounds impressive. In practice, it means I sit quietly in rooms where other people speak louder than I think. I listen. I document. I notice patterns. At family gatherings, however, none of that seems to matter. There, I'm simply the calm one. The quiet wife. The agreeable sister-in-law who doesn't argue, doesn't compete, doesn't demand attention. People tend to underestimate women like me. They mistake composure for passivity. They mistake patience for blindness. They mistake silence for weakness. This story is not about revenge. It's not about dramatic confrontations or explosive betrayals. It's about something far more unsettling: violation, hidden beneath familiarity. It's about how someone I shared holidays with, someone who hugged me at birthdays and complimented my cooking, secretly recorded my most private moments, and sold them online to fund a life she didn't want anyone else to see. And how I found out. One evening, after an ordinary workday, I discovered my face on a disturbing online forum. A site buried deep enough that most people never accidentally stumble across it. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I did what I always do. I observed. The source wasn't a hacked account. It wasn't a leaked cloud folder. It was far more intimate. A hidden camera embedded inside a teddy bear she had gifted me months earlier. A soft, pastel-coloured bear sat harmlessly on the armchair in my bedroom. A sentimental present from my sister-in-law. Something she said reminded her of me. That discovery didn't shatter me. It clarified me. Over the course of this story, I'll walk you through what happened, slowly, honestly, and without theatrics. You'll see how disrespect doesn't begin with cruelty. It begins with small allowances, how invisibility can feel safe until it becomes dangerous, and how silence, when chosen deliberately, can become the most powerful position in the room. I won't exaggerate. I won't dramatize. I won't invent rage where there was none, because the most unsettling transformations are the quiet ones. Have you ever realized that the person who underestimated you understood far less than they believed? If you asked my in-laws to describe me before all of this happened, they would have used words like sweet, steady, maybe even a little reserved. Never dangerous, never formidable. Certainly, never someone who would change the trajectory of a family. I married into a family that operated loudly. Opinions were delivered mid-sentence. Affection came with commentary. Privacy was negotiable. My husband, Daniel, had grown up inside that rhythm, and I admired how easily he moved through it. I learned quickly that the safest place for me was at the edge of the room, helping in the kitchen, refilling glasses, listening more than speaking. My sister-in-law Lila was the opposite of me in every visible way. She was magnetic, effortlessly social, always posting, always documenting. Her phone was never more than a few inches from her hand. She liked capturing memories, that's what she called it. Photos during dinner, videos during birthdays, quick candid clips, just for fun. No one ever questioned it. If anything, they found it charming. When I first joined the family, I made a quiet decision. I would not compete for space. I didn't need to be the most entertaining person in the room. I didn't need applause. I needed stability. I needed peace. So I became reliable. I remembered everyone's dietary restrictions. I sent thank you notes. I never forgot a birthday. If Lila made a cutting joke about how I was so serious all the time, I smiled. If she teased that I probably had spreadsheets for my grocery list, I let the laughter land. It wasn't self-loathing. It was a strategy, or at least that's what I told myself. Bum off. But over time, I noticed something subtle. The more agreeable I became, the more invisible I seemed to feel. Not ignored exactly, just unexamined, like furniture in a well-decorated room, necessary, not remarkable. At first, that invisibility felt safe. When family debates got heated, no one dragged me into them. When financial disagreements surfaced, my name never came up. I was trusted but not scrutinized, trusted but not considered powerful. There is a difference. Lila, in contrast, lived in constant performance. Her stories were always just dramatic enough. Her outfits are carefully casual. Her candid moments are suspiciously well-framed. She liked being watched. I preferred not to be. That difference between us seemed harmless at the time. If anything, I felt a quiet sympathy for her. It must be exhausting, I thought, to need that much attention. I never suspected that while she thrived in visible spaces, She was also building something in invisible ones. To them, I was predictable. Amy doesn't drink much. Amy goes to bed early. Amy works in computers, whatever that means. Amy's nice. Nice is a comfortable label. It keeps people from looking deeper. I don't blame them entirely for misreading me. I curated that perception. I avoided conflict. I kept my intelligence understated. At work, I analysed digital breach patterns and privacy vulnerabilities for corporations. At home, I folded napkins and asked about vacation plans. Two versions of me, both real, neither is fully seen. If someone had told them that one day I would quietly dismantle a betrayal without raising my voice, they would have laughed. Because to them, I wasn't someone who dismantled anything. I was someone who endured. And for a long time, I believed that too. But endurance and awareness are not the same thing. And awareness has a way of changing everything. Looking back, the first sign wasn't dramatic. It was almost forgettable. We were at Lila's townhouse for a late summer barbecue. The kind where the air smells like charcoal and citrus, and everyone pretends they're more relaxed than they actually are. She was filming, of course, panning slowly across the patio, narrating over laughter as if we were all supporting characters in her personal documentary. I remember standing near the sliding glass door, holding a plate I hadn't touched. She turned the camera toward me. "Amy," she sang, "our mysterious cybersecurity queen. Tell us something interesting about the dark web." Everyone chuckled. It sounded harmless, playful. I smiled politely. "It's mostly boring fraud schemes and bad operational security," I replied. Neutral. Safe. But she didn't lower the phone. "Oh, come on," she pressed, stepping closer. "You see crazy stuff, right? Like secret cameras and hackers spying on people. I swear Naz Sommel. Swear I could never live knowing someone might be watching." The word watching lingered in the air for a fraction too long. Again, harmless on the surface. But something in her tone felt performative. Like she was testing a reaction. Her eyes weren't on me. They were on the screen, checking the framing. I laughed softly and changed the subject. Later that evening, while helping her carry empty dishes inside, I noticed something odd. Her phone was propped upright against a cookbook on the kitchen counter. The camera lens was facing the hallway leading to the guest bathroom. It wasn't recording, at least not visibly. No red light, no countdown. Still, I remember adjusting it slightly so it faced the sink instead. A reflex, not an accusation. When I returned to the patio, Lila glanced at me for half a second. A small look, measuring. I told myself I was overthinking. That's the thing about small cuts. They don't bleed enough to demand attention. A few weeks later, she gave me the teddy bear. It was pale grey with a satin ribbon tied neatly around its neck. "I saw it and thought of you," she said. Soft but strong. It was oddly sentimental for her. We weren't particularly close. Friendly, yes. Intimate, no. I thanked her. Daniel teased that we didn't have space for more decor. I placed it on the armchair in our bedroom anyway. It looked harmless, decorative, childlike even. For months, nothing seemed out of place. But there were moments, tiny, almost invisible, that brushed against my instincts. Lila is asking oddly specific questions about my work schedule. Lila insisted on visiting when Daniel was traveling. Lila wandered briefly down our hallway when she claimed she was looking for the restroom. None of it crossed into accusation territory. Each instance was deniable. Explain what? And I let them pass. Because that is what you do when you don't want to seem paranoid. You smooth the surface. You rationalize. You tell yourself that family means safety. If I'm honest, the reason I dismissed those moments wasn't ignorance. It was discomfort. To question her behavior would mean questioning the foundation of the family I married into. And I had worked hard to belong. So I absorbed the unease and labeled it imagination. That was the first real mistake. Not trusting a stranger, but doubting my own quiet signal. The first cut rarely feels like an injury. It feels like something you can tolerate until you realize it was never small to begin with. Disrespect doesn't announce itself. It integrates. After the barbecue, small moments began stacking on top of each other in ways that felt too subtle to challenge, but too consistent to ignore. Lila developed a habit of filming inside our home. At first, it was framed as affection. "I love how cozy your place feels," she'd say, slowly panning across our living room. "Amy's aesthetic is so minimal, it's like a Pinterest board." Compliments can be camouflage. I would smile and adjust a pillow. Daniel would wave at the camera jokingly. It was all very ordinary, until I noticed she never asked before recording. She simply assumed permission. Once, during a Sunday brunch at our apartment, she excused herself to take a call. A few minutes later, I walked down the hallway and found her standing near our bedroom door. "Oh," she said lightly, lowering her phone. "I was just admiring that painting you have in there." The door had been half closed. I distinctly remembered leaving it that way. Her tone wasn't defensive. It was breezy, as if I'd caught her reaching for a glass of water. I nodded. "It's just a print." She smiled and brushed past me. That moment should have stayed sharper in my memory than it did. Instead, I softened it. "She's curious. She's just comfortable here. You're overreacting." The normalization wasn't just external, it was internal. At family dinners, she began telling small stories about me, half jokes that nudged at my privacy. "Amy probably has us all in a spreadsheet somewhere," she'd laugh. "She doesn't post much online because she's secretly judging our security settings." The room would laugh. I would too. It's easier to laugh than to explain boundaries. I told myself it wasn't malicious. It was her way of including me, making me part of the narrative. But there was a subtle shift. I stopped sharing details about my work. I kept conversations surface level. I noticed how often her phone tilted slightly upward, lens facing outward, even when she appeared distracted. And every time I noticed, I dismissed it. Because to question it would require friction. And friction disrupts harmony. Harmony had always been my currency. There's a specific exhaustion that comes from protecting other people's comfort at the expense of your intuition. You begin narrating your own experience in a softer voice. Maybe she didn't mean it. Maybe you're projecting. Maybe you're too sensitive. I became skilled at shrinking concerns before they matured. One evening, while Daniel was away on a work trip, Lila stopped by unannounced with leftover dessert from a gathering I couldn't attend. It felt thoughtful, almost generous. She hugged me tightly when she left. Her perfume lingered in the hallway long after the door closed. That night, as I got ready for bed, I had the faintest sensation of being observed. Not in a supernatural way, not dramatic, just a flicker. I looked around the room. Everything was exactly as it had been. The grey teddy bear sat on the armchair, ribbon perfectly tied. The lamp cast the same warm glow. The rain outside tapped gently against the window. Nothing had changed, and yet something in me had. I remember standing there for a long moment, scanning the space. Then I exhaled and turned off the light, because confronting a suspicion without proof feels irrational. And I pride myself on being rational. That's how normalization works. It convinces you that discomfort is a personality flaw rather than a signal. And slowly you adapt. You lower the threshold of what you consider inappropriate. You adjust. You tolerate. Until one day, the thing you tolerated quietly becomes something you cannot unknow. And by then, the damage has already been documented. Every family, whether they admit it or not, assigns roles. There's the dramatic one, the responsible one, the fragile one, the peacemaker. Without discussion, I had been assigned mine. I was the stable one, the composed one, the one who wouldn't overreact. It sounds flattering, it isn't? Because once people decide you are emotionally steady, they stop imagining that you could be emotionally affected. When Lila interrupted me mid-sentence, it was playful. When she teased me about my boring privacy obsession, it was affectionate. When she wandered into rooms without knocking, it was familiarity. If I had objected, I would have been labelled sensitive. So I didn't. At Thanksgiving that year, I noticed it clearly for the first time. The dining table was crowded, candles flickering between half-empty wine glasses. Conversation moved quickly, overlapping in waves. Lila was recounting a story about an influencer scandal, something about leaked footage and poor digital boundaries. She looked at me mid-story. "Amy would have warned her," she said. "Right, Amy? You're always telling people to cover their cameras." Laughter rippled around the table. I nodded slightly. "It's good practice, thanks." Then she leaned forward, smiling in a way that felt almost conspiratorial. "You're not secretly recording us right now, are you?" It was a joke, but it wasn't. There's a difference between teasing someone about something trivial and repeatedly circling around a theme. Cameras, privacy, surveillance, watching. The pattern was subtle but consistent. I felt something shift inside me that night. Not anger, not fear. Recognition. I wasn't just the stable one. I was the safe target. The one whose boundaries could be tested because she wouldn't explode. The one whose discomfort could be brushed aside because she would manage it privately. The reliable ones are often given the most to carry because no one expects them to drop it. Later that evening, While washing dishes alone in the kitchen, I caught my reflection in the darkened window. The room behind me buzzed with noise, but in the glass, I looked detached, observing. For the first time, I asked myself a quiet question. What would happen if I stopped protecting their comfort? The thought wasn't rebellious, it was analytical. Because in my professional life, I never ignored repeated anomalies. If a system pinged irregular activity, I investigated. I didn't rationalize it away because I wanted the network to feel harmonious. Yet at home, I had been doing exactly that. Allowing small boundary crossings because I preferred peace over friction. That night, when we returned home, I stood in the bedroom doorway again. The teddy bear remained exactly where it always sat. Harmless, decorative, sentimental. I walked past it and turned off the lamp, but something fundamental had shifted. I was beginning to understand the role I had accepted wasn't neutral. It was convenient for them and dangerous for me. There is a moment before transformation that doesn't look like a transformation at all. It looks like stillness, like compliance, like the same quiet woman folding napkins at the edge of the room. But internally, the evaluation begins. Patterns are mapped, anomalies are logged, variables are considered. They still believed I was the woman who endured. They didn't realize I had started calculating. The shift didn't happen during an argument. There was no raised voice, no accusation, no dramatic discovery. It happened on a Tuesday evening. Ordinary, quiet. Rain tapping against the windows, the way it often does in Seattle. Daniel was away again, 2 nights in Portland for a client meeting. I reheated leftovers, answered a few emails, and carried my graphite notebook to the bedroom. The teddy bear was still there. Same angle, same ribbon, same faint smile stitched into soft grey fabric. For months, it had blended into the background. Just another object absorbing the rhythm of our lives. But that night, something in my body refused to look away from it. Not fear, not paranoia, just refusal. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the silence stretch. In my work, when investigating digital breaches, there's a discipline I follow. Never begin with accusation. Begin with observation. Remove emotion. Study patterns. So I studied the room, the outlet placements, the Wi-Fi signal strength, the sight lines. Then I looked at the bear again. It was positioned at a slight angle toward the bed. Not centered, not casually tossed. Intentional. I stood and walked toward it slowly, almost amused at myself. I pressed its plush torso. Soft, lightweight. I turned it over. There, near the seam along the lower back, was something almost imperceptible. A stitching line is slightly uneven. Not sloppy, just subtly different from the factory seam. Most people would never notice it. I would. My heartbeat didn't spike. It steadied. I retrieved a small multi-tool from my desk drawer. Not to destroy, just to examine. I slid the blade gently along the uneven stitch and opened the seam just enough to peek inside. What I saw confirmed 2 things simultaneously. I was not paranoid, and this was not accidental. A miniature pinhole camera module, cleanly embedded, battery compact, micro SD slot accessible. The craftsmanship was deliberate, not improvised. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I sat back on my heels and let the air leave my lungs slowly. There's a particular clarity that arrives when intuition and evidence finally align. It feels less like shock and more like inevitability. For a long moment, I simply stared at it. Then I did something very quiet. I took photos. Detailed, close-up, time-stamped. I documented the device without removing it completely. Preserved the structure. Preserved the integrity. In my line of work, you never contaminate a scene prematurely. Only after documenting did I gently remove the micro SD card. I did not insert it into my personal laptop. Instead, I powered up a secured offline analysis device I use for malware testing. Isolated, air-gapped from any network. Habit, discipline. When the files loaded, the truth expanded beyond the physical object in my hand. There were clips. Short, intimate, unaware. Me reading, me changing clothes, me sleeping. Angles from the armchair. Time-stamped over months. My face, my private space, my unguarded moments catalogued. The folder structure suggested organization. Categories, export batches. I noticed file compression patterns consistent with upload preparation. That's when the emotional layer arrived. Not hysteria, not collapse. Violation. Not loud, deep. And beneath it, something steadier than anger. Resolve. Because this was no longer about awkward jokes or social teasing. This was calculated exploitation. And I knew enough about digital ecosystems to understand where such footage could end up. I closed the laptop gently. I reinserted the camera module exactly as I had found it. I stitched the seam loosely back into place, not perfectly, but convincingly. Then I placed the bear back on the chair at the exact same angle. Nothing outward had changed, but internally everything had. Silence was no longer endurance. Silence was preparation. That night, I didn't confront Daniel. I didn't call Lila. I didn't post anything online. I opened my notebook instead. And for the first time, I stopped asking whether I was overreacting. I began asking how far this went. The morning after I found the camera, I made breakfast exactly the way I always did. 2 eggs, black coffee. The window cracked slightly to let the rain-scented air in. Routine is disarming, especially when you're no longer living inside it. I texted Daniel a simple message. Hope your meeting goes well. No tremor in my words, no hidden meaning. Silence at that point was no longer about avoiding discomfort. It was tactical. If I confronted Lila immediately, the device would disappear. The evidence trail would narrow. Whoever she was connected to would be alerted. Digital ecosystems are fragile under scrutiny. Once operators suspect exposure, they migrate, wipe, and reconfigure. I needed time, so I allowed the camera to remain. That decision sounds colder than it felt. It wasn't indifference to my own violation. It was control. Removing the device would protect my privacy moving forward, but it would also erase the pathway backward. And I wanted the pathway. That week, I shifted my bedroom habits subtly. I rearranged furniture under the pretense of decluttering. I moved the armchair 2 inches to the left, just enough to alter the sightline toward the bed. I placed a tall floor plant near the window, small environmental changes that would reduce usable footage without signaling awareness. Then I watched. At work, I initiated a private research thread. Not on company systems, but on my secured personal network. I began tracking fringe forums known for unauthorized intimate content exchanges, sites buried behind layers of anonymity networks, the kind that don't appear in casual searches. It took 3 evenings. On the 4th, I found my face. Not on a mainstream platform, not even on a semi-public forum. It was inside a restricted access board dedicated to non-consensual private footage. The title of the thread was clinical, detached, tagged with location data narrowed to the Seattle metropolitan area. My breath didn't catch. Instead, I zoomed in. The still preview image was taken from the armchair angle, slightly compressed, cropped to remove identifiable surroundings. The uploader's handle wasn't Lila's name, of course. It was an alias, but the metadata fingerprint told a story. File compression software signature, upload cadence, timestamp alignment with the camera's internal log. She hadn't just recorded me, she had distributed me, and based on transaction comments within the thread, access to full-resolution files required payment. The realization unfolded in layers. This wasn't voyeurism for personal control. This was monetization, funding something, a lifestyle beyond what her public image suggested. I leaned back in my chair and felt something unexpected, calm, because fear thrives in uncertainty. And uncertainty had just dissolved. I didn't screenshot the forum recklessly. I captured it methodically, logged URLs, archived HTML snapshots, documented timestamps, preserved chain of custody integrity in case I needed it later. Silence now was no longer passive. It was strategic patience. Lila texted me 2 days later. Miss you? We should have coffee soon. I stared at the message longer than necessary, not because I felt conflicted, but because I was recalibrating. She believed I was unaware. She believed the camera was still invisible. She believed I was still the reliable one, the agreeable one, the woman who folded napkins and laughed at privacy jokes. And for now, I let her believe that. Because what she never understood about quiet people is this. We do not react immediately. We calculate. And once we decide to move, we don't move halfway. Preparation does not look dramatic from the outside. It looks like routine. That's what protected me. The week after I found the forum thread, I accepted Lila's invitation for coffee. We met at a bright cafe near Pike Place. She arrived 10 minutes late, windblown, smiling, phone already in her hand. I swear this month has been insane, she said, sliding into the seat across from me. I've been juggling so many projects. Projects. I watched her the way I would watch a network dashboard during a live breach. Neutral expression, heightened attention. She placed her phone face down on the table. Casual, deliberate. How's work? She asked. Busy, I replied. Privacy audits. Her smile flickered for less than a second. Micro-expression. Most people wouldn't catch it. I did. She began talking about a collaboration opportunity she was excited about. Something involving exclusive content and subscription-based communities. She kept it vague. Monetization without specifics. I nodded thoughtfully. Internally, I was mapping timelines. Uploads from the forum had increased over the past 3 months. The camera in the Bear was still active. I had verified the battery cycling pattern, which meant she, or someone connected to her, was retrieving data remotely or physically. I needed confirmation, so I created it. 3 days later, I staged a test. I placed a sheet of paper on my bedside table within the camera's likely field of view. On it, I wrote a phrase in thick black ink. "If you can see this, you're closer than you think." It was ambiguous, not accusatory, not explicit. Then I waited. Within 48 hours, a new post appeared on the forum. A still frame of that exact sheet of paper. Captioned, "Paranoid much?" No username acknowledgement, no direct message, but the timing aligned perfectly. My pulse remained steady. Confirmation achieved. She was monitoring in near real time, either collecting the device physically at intervals or accessing stored footage through a concealed method. That narrowed my strategy. I began documenting more aggressively, but invisibly. I installed a passive network scanner on my home router to log unknown device connections. Not to block them yet, just to observe MAC addresses, signal pings, and handshake attempts. I also began reviewing Lila's public-facing financial footprint. Not illegally, not invasively, open-source intelligence only. Her social media presence suggested a lifestyle exceeding her declared freelance income. Designer bags, weekend trips, studio rentals for content shoots. Funding had to originate somewhere. Then I found a digital breadcrumb. A small LLC registered under a name unrelated to hers, but linked through shared mailing address records. The business category? Digital media distribution. Nothing inherently criminal, but paired with the forum monetization trail, it formed context. Meanwhile, outwardly, nothing had changed. I attended family dinners. I laughed at jokes. I let her film short clips of dessert tables and candlelit gatherings. I maintained the role they assigned me. What they never noticed was the shift in my questions. I asked Daniel casually whether Lila had ever struggled financially growing up. He shrugged. She's always wanted more than she could afford. Interesting! I asked my mother-in-law about Lila's recent business ventures. "Oh, she's so entrepreneurial," she said proudly. "Always finding creative ways to earn." Creative. At night, I reviewed forum analytics. Transaction comments referenced consistent supplier and authentic domestic footage. That meant repeat buyers. That meant demand. Which meant scale. This wasn't impulsive betrayal. It was an operation. And operations leave trails. I began building a timeline. Date of gift delivery, first recorded file timestamp, first forum appearance, payment comments, LLC registration date. The pattern was linear, deliberate, profitable. Still, I felt no urge to explode. No desire to confront her across a dinner table and watch her scramble. Because anger is loud, and loudness warns people. Instead, I positioned. I consulted, anonymously at first, with a colleague specializing in digital evidence preservation, framed as a hypothetical scenario. I asked about admissibility standards, about cross-jurisdictional cyber exploitation cases, about civil versus criminal pathways. Information, not action. Yet, every day, she believed she was one step ahead. What she never noticed was that I had stopped being the woman who endured. I had become the woman who documented. And documentation, when complete, does not require volume. It requires timing. There is a difference between suspecting the depth of betrayal and seeing its full architecture. I had already confirmed the recordings, the uploads, the monetization, but I still didn't know the scale, so I expanded my search. Using anonymized credentials and a layered connection route, I requested access to the restricted tier of the forum where my thread lived. Access required payment. I paid, quietly, not because I wanted to see more of myself, but because I needed to understand what she believed she could sell. When the expanded archive loaded, my body remained still. There were dozens of clips, organized by date, tagged with descriptors that stripped humanity from ordinary moments: sleeping, changing, late-night routine. The comments beneath them were transactional, detached. Some users asked for specific angles, others requested longer durations. And beneath those requests, the uploader replied with short confirmations. Next batch coming soon, custom content possible. Custom. That word clarified everything. This wasn't passive distribution of archived footage. She was responding to demand. I scrolled further down the thread and found something else. Messages referencing the Seattle source and consistent supply every 2 weeks. Every 2 weeks. That aligned with her casual drop-ins when Daniel traveled. The teddy bear wasn't transmitting wirelessly. I had confirmed that through router logs, which meant physical retrieval. She was entering my bedroom while I trusted her in my home. The intimacy of that detail cut deeper than the footage itself. Still, I did not collapse. Instead, I opened my notebook and wrote a single sentence. The leverage is complete, because in that moment, something shifted from vulnerability to clarity. She believed she controlled the narrative. She believed the footage gave her power over my privacy, over my dignity, over my silence. But she had made a fundamental miscalculation. She had chosen someone who understood systems, and systems, when exposed, unravel predictably. I downloaded nothing directly from the forum. Instead, I captured forensic snapshots, metadata, transaction references, user interactions, ensuring no alteration of the original files. Then I traced the payment pathways. Cryptocurrency wallets leave patterns, even anonymized ones. With enough patience, transaction clustering reveals behavioral signatures. I followed a chain of microtransfers until it connected to an exchange account. The exchange required identity verification. The identity attached to that account was not Lila's name. It was the LLC, and the LLC listed her as a managing member. That was the private reveal. Not emotional, structural. This was not a misunderstanding, not reckless curiosity, not a lapse in judgment. It was an enterprise. I leaned back in my chair and allowed the information to settle into something solid. For months, I had been positioned as the naive one, the overly cautious one, the woman who worried about digital footprints. And all along, she had been building a hidden income stream from my most unguarded moments, funding her projects, her collaborations, her lifestyle. The clarity didn't make me angrier. It made me still. Because when betrayal becomes quantifiable, it becomes actionable. That night, I removed the camera permanently. Not abruptly, not destructively. I photographed it one final time, sealed it in an evidence bag, and stored it in a locked drawer. Then I rearranged the bedroom fully. New chair placement, different lighting, fresh decor. If she came looking again, she would find nothing. But I didn't alert her. Instead, I let the silence extend. On the forum, users began asking for the next upload. No response. 3 days later, any updates? Nothing. A week passed. The thread stagnated. I imagined her checking it, refreshing, calculating. For the first time, the imbalance shifted. She no longer knew what I knew. And that uncertainty would grow quietly, invisibly, just as mine once had. Power, I realized, is not loud. It is knowledge held at the right moment. And I now held everything. When you possess proof of betrayal, there is a dangerous temptation to act immediately. Expose, confront, detonate. I didn't. Instead, I listed my options. Option 1. Confront Lila privately. Demand explanation. Force an apology. Possibly accept some version of remorse in exchange for silence. Option 2. Tell Daniel first. Let him confront his sister. Allow the family to implode organically. Option 3. Remove myself quietly. Cut contact. Install new security. Pretend none of it happened. All 3 would protect me in different ways. None of them would address the scale. Because this wasn't only about my privacy. It was about distribution, monetization, an ongoing marketplace of non-consensual exploitation. If I chose a purely emotional response, I would shrink the issue to a family conflict. And it wasn't one, so I chose the irreversible path. Legal escalation. Not dramatic, not public, not theatrical. Structured. Before making any move, I scheduled a confidential consultation with an attorney specializing in cyber exploitation and digital privacy violations. I did not present it as family betrayal. I presented it as a case file. Evidence folder, timeline, device photographs, forum archives, payment trace analysis. He listened without interruption. When I finished, he leaned back and said something that confirmed my instincts. This is prosecutable. The word hung in the room with weight. He outlined potential charges: unlawful surveillance, distribution of intimate images without consent, financial exploitation, possible federal cybercrime implications due to interstate transactions. He also warned me of complexity, family dynamics, public record, emotional fallout. I asked only one question. If I proceed, can this be stopped permanently? His answer was careful. If handled correctly, yes. That was enough. The decision wasn't fueled by revenge, it was fueled by boundaries. I didn't want her apology. I wanted cessation. So we built the next phase quietly. A formal evidence preservation notice was drafted, not sent yet, but prepared. A forensic specialist was lined up to validate device authenticity and metadata chains. The cryptocurrency exchange was flagged for potential subpoena if necessary. Every step methodical. Meanwhile, outwardly, nothing shifted. I attended a family dinner the following Sunday. Lila seemed slightly distracted. Her phone buzzed more often than usual. At one point, she glanced at me with something like curiosity, maybe confusion. The uploads had stopped. Revenue had stalled, but she didn't know why. During dessert, she laughed at a joke Daniel made and reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "Missed you this week," she said warmly. I held her gaze for 2 full seconds. "Work's been busy," I replied. Which was true. She smiled, reassured. She still believed she was in control of the narrative. The irreversible choice isn't loud when you make it. It feels like stepping onto a path you cannot step off. There would be consequences. For her, for Daniel, for the family structure I had carefully preserved. But preserving comfort had already cost me enough. This wasn't about humiliating her. It was about drawing a line that could not be erased. And once that line is drawn legally, strategically, and completely, there is no undoing it. The most powerful actions rarely look like action. They look like paperwork. The week after I retained legal counsel, I did something that would have seemed almost absurd to anyone watching from the outside. I bought new bedsheets. Not because I needed them, because the room needed to look untouched. If investigators eventually needed to enter my home, the scene had to reflect continuity, not disruption. Evidence loses credibility when environments look staged or emotionally altered. I kept everything neutral. Meanwhile, the attorney initiated preliminary steps. First, a discreet consultation with a digital forensics firm. They examined the device I had preserved, verified its manufacturing origin, confirmed its storage capacity, and documented unique identifiers etched into the circuit board. Those identifiers traced back to a niche online supplier that required account registration. The purchase history tied to that supplier matched the LLC. Layer by layer, the architecture stabilized. Next came preservation requests. Formal legal notices sent to the cryptocurrency exchange and the forum's hosting provider, compelling them to retain all associated data pending potential court action. No accusations yet, just quiet containment. If Lila attempted to delete accounts, wipe servers, or close wallets, the logs would remain frozen. Silence at this stage was suffocating for her. I could feel it. At a family brunch that month, she seemed restless. She excused herself twice to check her phone. She asked me casually whether my privacy audits had been stressful lately. I watched her carefully. "Not particularly, were ya?" I said. She shrugged. "Just seems like a lot of cyber stuff in the news." There it was, testing the air. I didn't lean in. I didn't accuse. I simply changed the subject. Behind the scenes, the legal machinery continued. My attorney recommended filing a sealed complaint first, allowing law enforcement to investigate before any public charges surfaced. This would prevent media exposure and protect Daniel from immediate collateral damage. I agreed. Not to protect her, but to protect the integrity of the case. The sealed filing included an evidence photographs of the concealed camera, forensic validation reports, archived forum transactions, cryptocurrency wallet, trace analysis, the LLC, registration documentation. Every document is timestamped. Every claim is substantiated. No emotional language, just facts. What struck me most during this process wasn't anger. It was clarity. The narrative I had once believed about myself, that I was conflict-averse, overly accommodating, no longer applied. I wasn't avoiding confrontation. I was orchestrating a resolution. One evening, about 2 weeks after the preservation notices were sent, Lila texted me again. "Random question. Have you moved anything around in your bedroom lately? I swear the vibe feels different." I stared at the message. That told me 2 things. She had entered my home again. She had found nothing. My reply was simple. Just decluttering. She responded with a laughing emoji. But something had shifted in her tone. A subtle edge beneath the friendliness. The revenue stream had dried up. The forum thread had stagnated. Buyers were beginning to question reliability. And somewhere in that unraveling, she must have felt the absence of control. Still, she had no idea why. The official investigation would take time. Subpoenas, data retrieval, cross-verification. But the foundation was set. There's a misconception that justice is dramatic. It announces itself with sirens and confrontation. In reality, it begins quietly. In legal documents, in evidence bags, in signatures placed at the bottom of pages. By the time consequences become visible, the outcome has already been decided. And I had already decided. Consequences rarely arrive with clarity. They begin as an inconvenience. About a month after the sealed complaint was filed, Lila cancelled a family dinner at the last minute. Something came up, she texted the group chat. Business issue. No elaboration. Daniel frowned at his phone. She's been stressed lately, he said. Some payment processor froze one of her accounts. I kept my expression neutral. Payment processor. That meant at least one financial channel had been flagged, likely through the exchange's internal compliance review after receiving the preservation notice. Institutions tend to audit quietly before escalating. 2 days later, my mother-in-law called me unexpectedly. Have you talked to Lila? She asked. She sounds worried, says there's some legal mix-up with her company. Legal mix-up? Language softens when facts are unclear. I told her gently that I hadn't spoken to Lila much, which was true. Meanwhile, I received a secure update from my attorney. Law enforcement had formally requested transaction logs from the exchange. The forum's hosting provider had acknowledged the preservation order. Data was being compiled. The system was moving, still invisible. At the next family gathering, rescheduled reluctantly, Lila looked different. Not disheveled, not panicked, but thinner in presence, like someone constantly calculating. She hugged me, but her arms felt less certain. How have you been? She asked, studying my face. Good, I said evenly. You? She hesitated a fraction too long. Busy. During dinner, her phone buzzed repeatedly. She silenced it without checking, which was unusual for her. She laughed at jokes half a second too late. Her gaze drifted when conversations shifted toward business or money. No one else seemed to notice. But I did, because I understood the pattern of someone losing access to leverage. Later that evening, Daniel mentioned privately that Lila's LLC had been temporarily restricted pending documentation review. He sounded confused more than concerned. She says it's probably a compliance thing, he said. Random audit. Random audits are rarely random. The next week, I received confirmation that investigators had traced cryptocurrency transactions to multiple buyers across state lines. That expanded jurisdiction, increased severity. Still, no one had knocked on her door yet. This was the quiet tightening phase. Financial access is constricted, digital accounts flagged, legal notices pending. And in that constriction, cracks began forming. She texted me one night close to midnight. Have you ever felt like someone was watching you? The irony settled heavily between us, though she didn't know it. I replied after several minutes. Sometimes our own choices make us feel exposed. She didn't respond. That was the first time I sensed something close to fear radiating through her words. Not fear of me specifically, but fear of losing control of something she thought was secure. Consequences do not need confrontation to be felt. They manifest as instability. Revenue stops, accounts freeze, lawyers call. And in the absence of understanding, people search for explanations. She didn't know where the disruption originated, but she knew it had begun. And the worst part for her, the part I understood intimately, was uncertainty. Because uncertainty had once been mine, now it belonged to her. The call came on a Thursday morning. Daniel's voice was strained. Can you come home early? It's Lila. I already knew the phase we had entered. When I walked into the living room, she was sitting on the couch, hands clasped so tightly, her knuckles had gone pale. My mother-in-law hovered near the doorway, visibly shaken. On the coffee table lay a manila envelope. Official, unavoidable. Lila looked up at me, and for the first time since I had known her, there was no performance in her expression. No curated charm, no careful framing, just panic. They think I've done something illegal, she said quickly. It's a misunderstanding, some kind of cyber accusation. I don't even fully understand it. Her eyes searched my face, desperately, for alignment, for reassurance, for the steady Amy who would smooth this over. I remained composed. What exactly are they accusing you of? I asked. She swallowed. Unauthorized recording, distribution, financial exploitation. It sounds insane. The room felt still. Daniel's gaze moved between us, confused, disoriented. That can't be right, he said. Lila would never... He stopped mid-sentence, because even he, in that moment, heard the uncertainty in his own voice. Lila began talking faster. It's probably someone using my company name or identity theft. I swear, I would never record someone without permission. And that's, she cut herself off. Without permission. The phrase hung there. I studied her carefully. This was the point where many people would explode. Reveal everything. Shame her publicly in front of the family. But emotional spectacle would weaken the structure I had built. Instead, I asked a simple question. Have you ever installed a camera in someone's home? The air tightened. She froze. Only for a second, but it was enough. No, she said too quickly. Of course not. Daniel looked at her. Why would she even ask that? I held his gaze calmly, because that's what the document implies. I didn't reveal my evidence. I didn't confess that I had initiated the process. I simply let the official language speak for itself. Lila's composure began to fracture. They're twisting things, she insisted. You know how online spaces work. People exaggerate. It's probably just content misinterpretation. Content. There it was again. The language of commodification. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. Deliberate. Unhurried. When I returned, I placed the glass down and met her eyes fully. If there's evidence, I said evenly, it will surface. The silence that followed was heavier than any accusation. Because she didn't know how much evidence existed. She didn't know what had been preserved. She didn't know what I knew. Panic intensifies when there's no clear escape route. Over the next week, formal interviews began. Subpoenas were executed. The cryptocurrency exchange released identity verification records tied directly to her LLC. The device supplier confirmed shipment history. The structure was complete. She called me once late at night. Her voice was small. Amy, if I've ever done anything to hurt you unintentionally, I'm sorry. Unintentionally. That word revealed the final layer of denial. I hope the truth comes out, I reply. And I meant it, because at that point, nothing could be undone. Evidence had moved beyond family control, beyond personal negotiation. It now belonged to the process, and the process does not respond to an apology. By the time she understood that, it was already too late. The final conversation between us didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened in my living room. By then, formal charges had been filed. Not publicized widely, but official. Her LLC assets were frozen pending investigation. Daniel had read enough documentation to understand that this was not identity theft, not exaggeration. Evidence had weight. She asked to speak with me alone. Daniel hesitated before leaving the room, but I nodded gently. This was inevitable. When the door closed, Lila stood near the window, arms wrapped around herself. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, energetically. I need you to tell them it's not what they think, she said quietly. I didn't respond immediately. They're saying the footage came from inside your home, she continued. From your bedroom. It did, I said calmly. Her eyes flickered. You knew, she whispered. Yes. That single word changed the atmosphere. Not loud, not sharp. Just irreversible. How long? She asked. Long enough. She sank into the armchair, the same one where the teddy bear once sat. The absence of it seemed louder than its presence had ever been. I never meant for it to become this, she said. It started as a joke, a stupid experiment. Then people offered money, and it felt easy. Easy. I watched her carefully. Recording someone without consent isn't an experiment, I said evenly. Selling it isn't accidental. She flinched. Not at the content of my words, but at the steadiness of them. You could have just told me, she said suddenly. You could have confronted me. Why go this far? Because confrontation would have protected you, I thought. Instead, I answered simply, because it wasn't just about me. She blinked. It was about distribution, I continued. Monetization, repetition, you didn't stop. Tears gathered in her eyes, but they didn't fall. I was under pressure, she said. You don't understand what it's like to feel like you're failing. I held her gaze. I understand pressure, I replied. I don't use it to violate people. The room remained quiet. No shouting, no dramatic gestures. Just truth placed carefully between us. She searched my face for anger, for some sign that this was personal vengeance. When she didn't find it, something in her posture collapsed. You set this up, she said softly. Yes, another irreversible word. Her breath trembled. You let me think you didn't know. Yes. She closed her eyes briefly. I trusted you. The irony was almost unbearable, but I didn't smile. You entered my bedroom, I said. multiple times. Silence. Then barely audible. I didn't think you'd ever fight back. There it was. The role I had been assigned. Reliable, gentle, non-confrontational, invisible. I didn't fight, I said quietly, and I documented. That distinction seemed to land deeper than any accusation. She nodded slowly, understanding the finality. There was no negotiation left. No version of events that could soften what had been done. When Daniel returned to the room, we were both standing. No raised voices, no spectacle. Just two women facing the consequences of very different choices. And for the first time since this began, she wasn't looking at me as someone easy to overlook. She was looking at me as someone who had seen everything. People assume that events like this redefine you in dramatic ways. They expect bitterness, hardness, a visible edge. What surprised me most was how little noise the transformation made. The legal process continued its course. Plea negotiations, asset reviews, structured consequences that unfolded through paperwork and court schedules rather than spectacle. It wasn't cinematic. It was procedural. Daniel and I went to counseling, not because we were breaking, but because something foundational had shifted. Trust doesn't just fracture between two people, it ripples outward. He struggled with guilt, without seeing it, by bringing me into a family dynamic that allowed it. I never blamed him. Blindness and betrayal are not the same. Our home changed in small ways. Stronger locks, updated network segmentation, privacy film on certain windows, practical adjustments, not fear-driven, just informed. The armchair remains in the bedroom. The teddy bear does not. For a while, I wondered if I would feel exposed forever. If every quiet moment were to carry suspicion. It didn't, because the fear had never been about being watched. It had been about being unaware. Awareness, once regained, is stabilizing. What changed most wasn't my security protocol. It was my posture. At family gatherings, smaller now, quieter, I no longer default to the edge of the room. I don't overextend to smooth discomfort. I don't laugh at jokes that test boundaries. When someone interrupts me, I finish my sentence. When someone asks invasive questions, I decline politely. No explanation, no apology. Calm. That calm feels different than before. It isn't accommodation. It's ownership. I used to believe peace was something you preserved by absorbing tension, by being flexible, by letting small cuts go unaddressed. Now I understand that peace built on self-erasure is fragile. Real peace requires definition. Lila and I do not speak. The legal outcome created a distance that conversation cannot bridge. I don't wake up thinking about her. I don't rehearse arguments in the shower. I don't relive the footage in my mind. I archived it mentally, legally, emotionally. What remains is not anger. It's clarity. I see now how easily quiet women are misread. How composure is mistaken for compliance. How boundaries, when softly spoken, are assumed to be optional. They aren't. There is strength in volume, but there is a different kind of strength in stillness. The difference between who I was and who I am isn't dramatic. It's structural. I no longer minimize discomfort to protect someone else's narrative. I no longer trade privacy for belonging, and I no longer confuse endurance with virtue. If someone underestimates me now, I don't correct them. I let them, because I know something they don't. Silence is not submission. It's an assessment. And once I've assessed, I act. If you've listened this far, you might be expecting a triumphant ending. There isn't one. There's no applause, no cinematic courtroom speech, no public unraveling that restores balance in a single dramatic scene. What there is alignment. For a long time, I believed that being calm meant being accommodating, that being kind meant being flexible, that protecting harmony required self-reduction. I was wrong. What this experience taught me isn't that people are cruel. It's that boundaries unspoken are often boundaries ignored. And when someone benefits from your silence, they will rarely volunteer to correct it. The deeper violation wasn't just the camera, it was the assumption. The assumption that I would never look closely, that I would never act decisively, that I would choose comfort over consequence. But quiet does not mean powerless. Stillness does not mean unaware. And restraint does not mean incapable. If there's one lesson I carry forward, it's this. When something feels off, even slightly, pause long enough to observe it. Don't gaslight your own intuition for the sake of appearing easygoing. Discomfort is information. Patterns are information. Repetition is information. And information, when respected, becomes protection. I didn't shout. I didn't humiliate. I didn't destroy. I documented. I escalated properly. I drew a line that couldn't be erased. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted safety to mean something. So I'll leave you with a question, not about betrayal, but about boundaries. Have you ever stayed silent to keep the peace, only to realize that your silence was costing you more than conflict ever would? I'm listening.